Dave, thank you so much for being here today. I'm here with Dave Vasen, the CEO and founder of Brightwheel. Dave, I think we met first in 2017, and Brightwheel was in a WeWork office and had about 7 employees. For the audience today, some are going to be familiar with Brightwheel and others not as much. Would you mind just taking a minute and introducing yourself in the company and giving us a quick snapshot on where you are today?
Yeah, sounds great. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I think we met. I think it was your first week with GGV, and we
Probably.
were probably like 6, 7, 8 people. I always like to point out very very much pre revenue and figuring out a lot of things. So overall, Brightwheel is the SaaS leader in early education. So when you think of preschools, daycares, after school programs, and as I'm sure we'll talk about, vertical SaaS is the idea that you serve kind of a single industry with the full toolkit of things. And when you look at a preschool, it's actually like just a multitude of systems and things that they're running day to day that you might not kind of recognize on the outset, but literally like 15 different systems scattered throughout the school to help run everything. And as a small business, like a preschool actually looks very similar to a restaurant, a yoga studio, to other small businesses, much more so than actually a school that most people would kind of associate with it. And so we help them run better. We help them run more efficiently. We serve all kind of constituents within the school. So the owner, the administrators, the staff members, teachers, parents, even the broader audience beyond that. And yeah, feel very lucky that we get to serve, more and more of them every day throughout the U.S. and then increasingly globally. And then company wise, we are just north of like 275 people now, scattered throughout the U.S. In this COVID world, and continue to grow quickly and building up kind of new functions quickly within and trying to just take full advantage of the opportunity that we have to really be the brand and the experience of this industry.
It's great. It's amazing growth. And what was the original impetus for focusing on early education? Because some would say, not obvious for a
Yeah.
tech software company.
Yeah, for me, so I had spent a lot of my career actually in education technology of some kind, like hardware, software, devices, like even like building physical schools. And the idea was always to think about how to scale impact for teachers, for parents, and ultimately for kids. And I was just blown away when my older daughter was born. She's now 7, and I was pulled into the space. And I think for people who are passionate about education, they usually think about kind of K through 12, and that's just naturally where a lot of people orient around. I had oriented a lot of my time around that and just hadn't thought about the years before the K. And the reality is, like from an impact level, it's far more impactful for the child. The first 5 years of life are absolutely critical. It's a must for working families. It's actually the number one or number two thing that families spend on. Um, and it's actually a major opportunity to impact small businesses. So the impact was actually greater than where I had been spending my time. And then when you looked at it, as I was literally going door to door in the heart of San Francisco at the time, trying to find some childcare help for my wife and I, who both work full time, I was just blown away. Like, you're in the tech hub of the world, and
Right.
you're walking into these places who are serving the parents of these tech companies, and they're doing it with pen and paper and Excel and really old, frankly, crappy software. And there wasn't actually, I can tell you more about it. There wasn't really an understanding or definition at that time of what vertical SaaS, what it's become today. But there was a
Right.
recognition of just a deep user need. And I think when you have that need at the local level in a big enough market, and this is a huge market, that was the impetus. It's just literally seeing the pain, from these owners and operators firsthand.
Great products are born of a big need, and for your
Mhm.
personal experience has specific and special meaning. And we're seeing so much of this just exacerbated now with, in the middle of the pandemic and the whole return to work and how critical this actually is to helping people, enabling families to get out and live their everyday life and go to work.
Yeah,
So great.
there's no question. Like, during this time, our team has rallied around the idea that we're helping small businesses, helping them reopen, get up and running again, and then those small businesses, in many ways, drive the economy, and like families
Right.
rely on them and trust in them. So it's been definitely like the heartbeat of the company throughout all this.
Yep. And you mentioned that your oldest daughter is now 7, but
Mhm.
7, 8, 10 years ago, the opportunity for SMB vertical tech businesses was maybe not as obvious, or there weren't as many proof points as there are today. As of late, we've seen these incredible IPOs with Toast and Squarespace and Freshworks, and there are so many different examples to point to of SMB vertically focused software companies that have become just had enormous growth. What do you think it is? What has changed over the last 8 to 10 years? Why is the moment now that it feels? Because it feels like we're in a moment, and only more so looking forward. But what is it
Yeah.
about timing now?
Yeah, it's funny looking back in 2014. Like I mentioned the impact. I was drawn to the software need. I wouldn't say that I fully knew what the business model was going to come together like. And I'll credit actually the Bessemer team pretty early in that journey. And they said, "Oh, you're the mind body of childcare." I was like, "Oh, that's awesome. Like, what or who is mind body? Like, what does that mean?" I had no clue. And at the time, it was still about a year out from MindBody's IPO. I think they IPO'd in like 2015, mid 2015. And at the time, when all of a sudden this multi-billion-dollar company selling relatively low-price software to yoga studios, like I think that was an eye-opening moment for a lot of people. That like you can build a really big business serving small businesses in a big enough market, and doing more and more for them over time. And the cool thing is like that playbook has now been followed, several times over. And I didn't know at the time that Service Titan, Toast, Procore, all these companies were also building quietly at that time. And
Right.
I'm sure they describe it differently. I consider them the Brightwheel for restaurants, yoga studios, contractors, plumbers, etc. I'm sure they flip it when they describe it, but
Right. Right.
uh, I think what people are recognizing is like if you can deliver enough value,
Mm-hmm.
if you can build something that people love enough to retain and stay with for a long time, and it's a big enough market. There's 850,000 preschools and daycares in the U.S., which I think is a mind-boggling number when you think about it. There's a real market there, and I think by building, especially modern SaaS, that people can get into really easily, get value out of, and frankly fall in love with in some ways, like really rely on it. It scales, and I think certainly like the Procore IPO earlier this year, and then the Toast IPO just a couple of weeks ago, have really helped tell that story, and I think it's opened up a lot of eyes.
It's so true. And what is unique, Dave? You worked at a few different tech companies prior to building Brightwheel. What is specifically unique to building SMB vertical software?
I think it's like a deep understanding of kind of a single type of user. Like if you think of like there's just different challenges. If you think of like a Slack or Dropbox, they're building that one kind of product, but they have to cover a bunch of use cases, in a different types of users for that single product. We're focusing on one user and just going really deep with that single user. And for us, it is taking a perspective on like what type of software do we want to build, what's our approach to it. For us, it's solving pain in a really elegant way and delivering
Mhm.
value. And then thinking about like within the stack of things you could do. And I think, the others that I mentioned have shown there's a big stack, right? When you think of all the things that a small business is doing. And I'll just name it really quickly for preschool. Like they are, managing staff, communicating with families, taking payments and tuition, running payroll, doing scheduling, taking admissions, like day-to-day licensing. Like there's just a lot when you break it down. And so
Mhm.
I think it's figuring out what do you tackle first? When do you move on to that next thing? And when do you feel like you're delivering enough value to frankly just start charging people for it in a world where, SMBs are really willing to pay for something if they get value out of it.
Right. And what software and tech platforms are really enabling is you're effectively becoming kind of the back end operating system of these small businesses.
Yeah.
So, I'm enabling them to spend more time doing what they do well and what is the core competency. So, facilitating all of that. To that point, kind of figuring out like in what you're suggesting is like from a product perspective, the
Mhm.
ability to go deep with the product to get to know your customer and to really
Yeah.
understand the pain points with incredible depth.
Yeah.
What describe a little bit about that customer relationship, because it sounds like you do have the chance by being so focused, you do have the chance to have a unique relationship there.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and every company does this differently. For us, actually ended up being that just like as I was organically discovering the space, I spent upwards of 9 months like in the front office and the back office and like over the shoulder of these
Mhm.
business owners and just thinking and figuring out and then building eventually alongside them. And so by the time that we launched, we had a good understanding and like had enough reaction and response to it. I think with these business owners, you have to have a sense of like where you want to take things. You can't go say, to a small business owner, hey, would you shift to online payments or would you use this tool? You gotta like really dig in and like ask the why many times over, understand like what is the root of the pain. Like if they say they need this one feature, maybe they do, but there's probably something underlying that ask of like what they're really trying to solve, what they're really trying to get at. And I think as a SaaS company, your ability to like really understand that, find the most elegant way to deliver on that, ideally the fastest way as well to deliver on that need and build trust through that. Like the more that we solved our users' pain, that they felt like, okay, this is built for me, they're getting value out of it, they're going to trust you to go along that journey more and more. And then there is that aspect of just even, word of mouth as that trust builds, they will tell other people and the word gets out. And that's another factor, I think, where small businesses these days are just becoming frankly more trustworthy
Mhm.
of software and more more willing to and accept and pay for it. And if you can solve that in a way that they feel like it was built for them and it really works for them, you're generating a long-term relationship with that customer.
It's so true. It's so true. And the more you kind of add to that operating system per se, the more value you create, and you also kind of engage them and keep them
Yeah.
as customers in theory.
Yeah.
So fintech and payments is an absolute, I think, unlock for these businesses.
Mhm.
So can you speak to that a little bit because this is becoming, I don't want to say ubiquitous, but it's becoming pretty important and prolific across the sector.
Yeah.
What do you see there, and how do you prioritize or not, or how do you think people that are building these businesses should think about fintech incorporated into these solutions?
Yeah, I mean, probably not a surprise that fintech is in general important. Like you look at PayPal, you look at Stripe and Adyen, and I mean, it's a very very big opportunity in general, and it delivers real value. I think what vertical SaaS is showing is that if you can really deliver on the fintech need in a unique way that drives real value, you're building that long term customer and that level of trust. And I think as opposed to like kind of a generic, like call it a Stripe or a PayPal, what we have to do is understand like the real deep needs of our customer when it comes to finances. And like for us, it's like, getting them paid on time, automating their collection of tuition, giving them the reporting and insights to understand things. So there's layers of depth that you have to deliver on. I think when you go deeper, there's just an expectation that's different. But when you do that, you really build that level of trust and you're delivering real value. Like when a business, whether it's a restaurant or a preschool, if they are taking their life, lifeblood, like if they're taking their payments on you, like you have hopefully a customer for life. And you have to protect that, you have to deliver on that, you have to keep investing in that. But it is the core of what they do. And then you realize there's more and more. And the Toast story, I think, through their S1 is a great one where they showed, okay, we're going to start with the front office, payment terminal. And then after that, we're going to add in payroll. And then we're going to do capital and lending. And, you can see year by year how they've just added more and more value. And it's just a really great playbook for folks. And the great thing, what I really like about this space and vertical SaaS in general is there's such good alignment between the business model and the value you're delivering, right? Like all of those things are going to take off because the users need them and it's delivering real value for the users. And so like I just feel like when you have that alignment, when you're able to deliver that, you're working kind of in concert with your customer and
Yep,
everybody wins kind of thing.
it's so true. Everything is aligned, and
Yeah.
everybody grows together.
Yeah, like
Um,
I mean, for us, for example, like some of my early research, actually, it might be interesting. Like in the first year, went out and just said, "Hey, like, would you use online payments?" And again, in the heart of San Francisco, in some cases, although I was talking to everybody across the country, and like, no, I have no interest in that. I have no interest in that. But then you ask, like, what is the most challenging, difficult, annoying, time-consuming thing that you do?
yeah,
And one of them was like chasing down checks, from parents who don't pay, going to the bank every Friday, waiting for deposits to hit, right? And so if we can take that pain and make it automated and easy and like know they can know that we have like record time for taking money and moving it over to them. They
yep,
know when it's going to hit. They get the confirmation. If something doesn't happen, they have an easy way to follow up and they have all the reporting behind it. There's real value there, and our ability to deliver on that promise of like helping them run better and more efficiently and ultimately helping them scale is a huge deal for them. And I think it would have been hard for them to verbalize that, but
it's
that's
so
that's the
true.
backbone of the business, and like we're able to deliver on that.
it just can render them so much more efficient.
Yeah.
And to your point, like take pain, reduce pain, it's a win-win, right? And help
Yeah.
them focus on what they do well and what they want to be doing versus chasing people around for checks. It's very, very
And
true.
that's no, and that's our personal claim to fame. I know every company measures things differently, but our ability to save time, if you're an administrator, just to run your business better, if you're a teacher, to spend more time with kids,
Right.
those measurements are like, I think, especially for a small business, it's like that your time is everything, right? And our
It,
ability to give them back time is really important.
you empower them, which,
Mhm.
that's the whole point.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about when people are building an SMB or a vertical SaaS business and thinking about size of deal, because
Mhm.
you want to start to build a customer base, you want to scale, ramp, but small businesses are not necessarily, we're not talking enterprise size budgets. So
Right.
what would you recommend to somebody, a founder who's building a company in vertical SaaS to start thinking about the sales process and also specifically size of deal?
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who took like, economics 101, it's like the price quantity trade-off. And so like in a world where you're, say, enterprise and you have small quantity, but you're signing seven-figure deals,
Hmm.
that can work out. And in SMB space, if you get a vertical big enough, and there's not an endless amount of them, but if you're in a vertical big enough, the price piece can come down if the quantity is high. And so, I think first of all, you just got to understand that. And like certainly in my early Google searches were like, how big is this market? And trying to size it up and understand it. And realizing, for us in our case, quite big. And I think, similar when you look at the other vertical SaaS leaders that we've talked about. And then you got to just work from that to, I think, a top down in terms of just what is the opportunity, but also bottoms up in terms of understanding what is that customer willing to pay. I don't think customers are great at saying, yeah, I would pay this or that for something before they actually touch and feel it. Like it just, it
Right.
doesn't, and if anything, they're probably going to express a level of price sensitivity that is greater than reality. And so for us, it was, delivering value for them, having
Hmm.
that conversation in concert and adjusting that over time and like being pretty nimble with our early customers and literally not having price anywhere, but just getting a sense of like, okay, we're going to deliver on this and literally just having a conversation at one at a time. If
Hmm.
it's this, we charge on a per seat basis. So literally like, does this feel right? And I know that may sound crazy. So there's that piece of it, which is just understanding your customer. And then I think there's just now great data out there. Like if you go to any of those sites that I mentioned, Toast, a service site, and Procore, like you're going to see the pricing that's out there, and you can get a sense of like companies have scaled offering anywhere from free to low $100 a month products, and that can really work in a market that is big enough.
Yeah, very true. So switching gears a little bit, Dave,
Yeah.
you've been able to build just an absolutely amazing team. Just incredible talent from everywhere. And question to you about that is how there aren't necessarily that many companies out there where people would have domain expertise per se. How have you thought about building your leadership team around that? Have you looked for talent that comes out of vertical SaaS, or is that something that people can acquire? A skill set that they can acquire on the job.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. Like that's the highest compliment that you could give. We have taken a lot of care, certainly in building the team, and like as you know very intimately, it's not easy. And I think putting the pieces in place to get the right people on board and build and retain them and grow them over time, and continue to add to that. Like that's my number one focus. That's certainly our number one focus. So thank you for that. I would say it's really case by case. I would say that I'm more on the extreme side of don't need direct tangible experience in a domain if I generalize. And like the best example I can give is like you and I actually went back and forth on this at one point, but when we hired in our head, now VP of people, she didn't have cycles in doing that job before. And everyone I talked to, everybody at Benchmark was like, you need to hire a 15-year veteran who's done, either HR or recruiting, and that person will then do both. And that was like the playbook that I had heard about. And for us, like it's very culture specific, and like we have a set of leadership principles that we have defined and really believe in. But we're a group of problem solvers and builders, and there's certainly cases where that could have worked for us. But I think for us it was really finding the person who's going to work through the challenges, the opportunities, and build scalable programs for us, and be dynamic enough as this business is really changing. And so brought on Leah, who's been totally incredible in understanding and scaling with us, and building that, a team and an org around that. There's obviously other domains, like we just brought on a new head of engineering, and like you need deep domain experience in that, in terms of engineering. But I would say also, like, it doesn't need to be SaaS, it doesn't need to be vertical SaaS. And I think understanding how you want to build, who, like, the principles that you want to build product by, and the kind of energy around that is far more important than saying, oh, they built a similar system elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the biggest exception I would say, or like where I get more specific, is in areas of go to market, where if someone has done a lot, for example, of go to market for enterprise, that's going to be, potentially more challenging for them to come over. And so, like, I guess actually I am still more in the broad spectrum toolkit, but having some reps and having done that before, in terms of like some of that helps in people coming in faster. And you have to understand, like, the biases that people are going to have based on like the experience that they come in with. But ultimately, I think, as a company, personally, we bet on athletes, and we're willing to say, okay, you don't have direct domain experience, but you align with all these other things that we're looking for. Like, let's go build this together.
Right. I love it. And when you say, you've hired folks out from Bain Consulting and, out of different industries and had just tremendous success. So I think it's good counsel, but so, keeping focus where domain expertise is pretty critical is important to balance the team.
The biggest thing, like the biggest mistake that I made at one point, was like hiring based on LinkedIn, and like my
Yeah.
biggest advice to folks generally around that is like, know how you want to operate as a company. For us, it's our 10 leadership principles,
Yep.
and know what makes you special and like what you believe in. I always say that, like, there are people who could be really successful at Google or Facebook, but not vice versa, and everybody has their own culture. And I think understanding, the type of culture and the principles that you want to build a company by is far more important than direct domain experience. And even if, like, you had direct domain experience, but they're just not a match for your company, you got to figure that out.
How old were you as a company when you established those principles? And have
Yeah.
they adjusted or grown or changed as you have?
Yeah, not early enough, I guess. Is it, like, I for whatever reason took for granted the idea that, like, if you just bring great smart people together in the right environment, everything else will work itself out. And that's despite all the podcasts and all the things that say, the importance of culture. So if I add to all of those, I would say, like, it's definitely worth investing in it early. And that's one of the biggest counsels I give to founders now, which is, I had to go through a relatively tough experience where we had kind of gone the wrong direction on some hiring, go through the challenge of that, and the change that required, to realize that, okay, we got it right in the first couple of hires, and now we need to codify that and make sure that we understand it. And so we were about 2 years in when we defined, like, our first set of what we called at the time core values.
Mm-hmm.
We've now evolved that into this set of leadership principles. It's up to every company. I think I look more at, like, DoorDash or Amazon as really good examples for us, where for us it's less about the values, it's more about, like, how do they show up every day, and what does it
Right.
feel like to
Like
work at that
behavior.
company. So it's like, it's really specific, and I think we've gotten down to the point where people can look at them and, like, for example, we have one around ownership, which is really important, and, like, the last line in that principle is, like, we never say it's not my job. Just, like, really, specific levels that people can grok and understand. And
Mm-hmm.
then the big thing is, you got to infuse that. Like, you can't just,
Right.
like, create this thing that's going to sit on the wall, or some virtual bulletin board or whatever. Like, for us, it was putting that into our hiring scorecards, literally giving awards based on it, doing our performance reviews on it. You got to live and breathe that, and find the right ways to infuse it, and really stick to it. Also, like, if you're making exceptions all the time, and it's not holding true, it's just not going to mean anything.
It's so true. These are lived values. And I think so important in terms of going big. The title today is around go big, go vertical.
Yeah,
And I think pretty important is the bedrock of building for scale.
yeah,
Kind of along the lines of going big, you were a little ahead of the curve in terms of having a distributed team and really building culture and connective tissue across the company with people in many different locations. What do you think of today's the paradigm that the new paradigm that we're all experiencing in terms of the way that we're all working, the way that we're interacting and communicating and being productive?
yeah.
How is that playing out at Brightwheel, and what would you suggest to other folks who are building companies?
Yeah, we opened up our second office, right after we hit 20 people, which obviously is really early. And for us, it was, and by the way, one advice I'd give for anybody thinking about vertical SaaS is like understand your unit economics. Like we knew that we wouldn't be able to support a massive, 100 person team in San Francisco. It just wouldn't make sense for our customer, and understanding that early was really important. So that forced us. We opened up Denver. We then opened up Austin. And so when the pandemic hit and we went full virtual, like it was an adjustment for sure, in particular for some of our like in-person heavy teams like sales. But we'd also, as a company, gotten rhythm of understanding how to operate, in a distributed manner. And we're all in. And I think for us, like the biggest thing is having a strong people team at the core of it. People, and that team is measuring, listening, understanding. Like we do regular pulse surveys on a monthly basis and bigger ones on a semi-annual basis, and like just looking at the data and understanding and having open doors for listening. And it's been amazing, honestly, to see that our scores have actually consistently gone up. And it's not just the pandemic, it's all the other crap going on in the world. I mean, it's just been a hard time, I think, for leaders and people leaders in general with everything that's going on. And the ability to kind of invest in our team, over communicate with them, build bridges through things like all hands and virtual touch points, and have I'd say that strong people team at the core of it. It's been really, really cool to see. And it certainly gives me confidence about our ability to kind of double down on this as we go forward.
Yep. And you've not only done that, I would argue you've done an exceptional job with your employees, but also with your customers. Can you speak a little bit to your journey with customer success? How do you support and make sure that you have arms around, the customers, the small businesses? How have you built that function, and how do you think about it?
It's a great question, because I think a lot of folks, maybe in particular in Silicon Valley, but folks who are kind of more product engineering minded, there's an assumption that the product will do it all. And I would say maybe I had that bias to some extent. And I think what we saw when we first launched our kind of paid experience, once we got all of that hammered out, is folks do need and want support. And it's a different layers. But in particular, like I think a small business is going to have less abilities around change management and technology, than someone who has an IT person on staff, or who has like a whole department who is ready to deploy something. And so our ability to go in there and literally be a coach and like help them and get them, motivated and understanding, and kind of help them along the way. It's an investment, but it's one that's important, that pays off. And like, then the ability to support them across that journey. And again, like I think the frequency of that is going to really matter on unit economics, like the level of which, if it's a one-on-one or one-to-many. But I would just say you can't discount the importance of customer success. Like it's
Right.
a big part of it, both in terms of like the onboarding and then even just the ongoing support. And if people feel like, they are heard, and I guess the way that I'll pull back and say, the way I describe it to the team is like every touch point matters, right? It, like when they first get that marketing email, on the first, call with a salesperson, on, every touch point of support through the product, like it all matters. And you have to think as a company about, maybe you'll invest more in some of those touch points, but you also can't disregard them, because you're kind of playing with fire in terms of as soon as customers start having a bad experience, that's something that can quickly spread.
So is it more of an investment for vertical SaaS?
Mm, yes and no. I think it is comparatively less, I would say, because like if you have a multi-million-dollar deal in enterprise, you're going to put a single person on that, and they're going to obsess about that, until that deal is done and on board and ready. And in our case, we have to be essentially more, I guess efficient is the right way to say it, but we have to do things that will scale more, because for every one enterprise, you have to have tens or hundreds of SMBs. And so it's maybe dollar for dollar, it could be equivalent, but in terms of how it shows up, it's more of a one-to-many model as opposed to a one-to-one.
Yeah. And so much of, what I'm hearing and what you've talked about today is really about building that customer trust.
Yeah.
One small business at a time, adding value, going deep. What advice would you give to the founders out there who are building vertical SaaS businesses, or who are thinking about addressing a pain point in a particular sector?
First of all, like make sure you're listening. Like I think for us, we instrumented on day one for launch. Like we knew when customers were going to come to us, like if they had a request or a bug or a problem or whatever it was, we were going to understand that and instrument it and watch that data. And then we found a bunch of ways as we scale to have these customer touch points. And we have a customer sounding board, we have an ambassador group, we have all these ways that we stay really close to the customer. and you can never get too far from that. I think is what's really really important. And then having that regular touch point, not just as a team, but really as a company, and keeping that at the heartbeat of the company has been something that we've invested a lot in. And so I think I look to that overall as kind of the cornerstone for us for Brightwheel. The bigger you get, the more you scale, the more departments you have. It takes more effort to keep that proximity to the customer.
So true. So true. Okay, so we only have a couple minutes left, Dave, but
Yeah.
I'd love to end with a customer story because it's so heartening to, from the ones that I've heard in terms of how you're impacting people through software and enabling these businesses. Give us your favorite one.
Yeah, I mean, so we start every meeting, whether board meeting or team meeting, with a customer story. And so like it's honestly hard to pick just one. I think it's like, in broadly, I would say like the ability, like if you get it right, the ability to impact a small business is just going to be really really meaningful. And not to take away from enterprise or other industries, but it's like it's their thing, right? It's their baby, just like a startup is our baby. And the ability to help them navigate, support them, help them see value. Like you hear it and you see it, and we see it that show up in our reviews. And then the really cool thing about Brightwheel is that then there's also this connection to home where parents have, it's their literal baby.
Yes.
And so like their ability to like understand their child better, and to stay connected to their school and know what's going on. And so for us, it is like that ongoing connection, and Brightwheel being at the center of it and hearing that story from both. If I generalize on both sides, I'll say there's like one example that jumps out to me from early on, where it was a mom entrepreneur who started in-home childcare, expanded it, and truly actually thanked Brightwheel because of like the ability to just run her operations more efficiently. Now runs 2 locations, and is able to do that because Brightwheel has been at the helm, kind of taking off all the difficult things that she was doing beforehand. And on the parent side, we get a lot of parents who are returning to work, post maternity, post paternity leave, and just what they expressed in terms of like how the fear that they had, or the worry that they had, and then how they actually end up feeling connected. Like worries aside, like they're just super grateful because like they feel like they can do what they have to or want to do when it comes to work, but also maintain that connection to their child, or even at a deeper level. So I mean, something that we certainly like. That's what we thrive on. And then broadly, I say like just finding the right ways to kind of make sure that you share those stories. Like to your question, is the
Yeah.
big thing. Like you can't let that get lost. As you scale to bigger and bigger levels. Like what I tell the team is each one of those matters, and like every school that we add, the impact of that ripples, right? Like you're touching the owner, the administrator, the staff, literally throughout the community, and even like across the world, we see grandparents light up their phones at night because they're checking in on their grandparents halfway, or grandkids halfway across the world. So keeping that close to the company and close to the heartbeat in terms of the why you're doing what you're doing, especially as you get bigger, I think it's just super important.
Yeah, and just reminding everybody of the mission and the why.
Yeah. Yeah.
So critically important. Well, Dave, we are out of time, but can't thank you enough for being here today. And we're so thrilled to be a partner to you in this journey. And kudos to you and the entire Brightwheel team.
Well, thanks for having me. I always say like you guys joined when we were like you said, 7 or 8 people, a lot to be determined, and have been amazing partners along the way. So thank you for having me, and for the partnership.
Thank you so much.